Greetings from the walkie-talkie traveller channel here in Lublin, Poland, just outside the city centre. About an hour and a half walk or an easy bus ride once you can find a machine which will sell you a ticket for 3 zloty for a 15-minute trip. We've come to Majdanek Memorial and Museum. Majdanek, a famous concentration and extermination camp, of course, when the German army came and occupied Poland in the Second World War. In their hurry to leave with the advancing Russians a few years later, they didn't actually have time to destroy much, if anything, of what they had constructed here. When the Russians arrived, what they discovered was a pretty much complete concentration and extermination camp of not just Jews, but also Poles, who were considered to be a danger, a threat to the German occupiers. And I'm seeing here museum and memorial site in Sobibor. The permanent exhibition is now open. So that is another concentration camp. If you have a fascination with this period in history and want to do a tour based on visiting the concentration camps, however, for most of us, just visiting one once in a while is as much as we find palatable, given the horrors that took place here and the information which is starkly set out as a reminder of what can happen, just in case we should get too comfy and cozy in Europe and think war is a thing of the past. Well, of course, it never is. It's always boiling just under the surface in some areas of Europe, and rages, as we know, in Ukraine right now. Interestingly, my roommate at the hostel here in Lublin, Mr. Moad, one of my roommates, there are all 4 beds occupied now in our 4-bed dorm, but Mr. Moad, from Morocco originally, was surprised and found it odd that this site should be considered a museum. Different cultures, different views, and even similar cultures, different views. But the underlying idea has to be, of course, we don't want to forget, lest history repeats itself again. And a museum, not just a memorial site, because it does lay out the information and history of the place. Indeed, for those who doubt that history necessarily will repeat itself, there are sobering lessons in many such sites, whether they be concentration camps, former houses of interrogation and torture and execution. What typically would happen in Eastern Europe, we would have sites associated with such horrors under the Russian Tsarist Empire, which would then pass into the hands of the communist Bolshevik Empire, who would use those very same sites for very similar purposes, but of course against other individuals. And then German occupiers would come and find such places of use for their intentions. And then once again, after the German extreme nationalist forces were driven out, organizations such as the NKVD, the Russian Bolshevik Empire, was back in control, and once again would occupy such places for their own hideous forms of torture and interrogation and murder. So yes, sadly history very much does repeat itself. Lest we are on guard at all times, it seems, and prepared to stand up against such threats in the future, and those which are indeed in the present. Opening hours, and I have got here a little bit late, but I still have time, I think, to get a good impression of Majdanek. I've been here once before, many years ago. I had a little difficulty because the hostel, for rest hostel, isn't best located for bus services. However, in this case, in theory, there was a bus stop only 400 meters away, which I could have taken a 153 bus directly here. However, there was no ticket machine at that bus stop, and ticket drivers aren't issuing tickets, and you can't buy tickets anymore from Żabka the way you used to back in the day, many years ago, admittedly. Not in the Żabkas that I tried anyway. And so it did take me a little bit of a walk. I passed several bus stops en route which had no possibility for buying tickets from machines, and when I did find the first machine, it refused to accept my coins and it refused to accept my card payment. So kept walking a little bit more, and eventually I did find a bus stop which had a nearby ticket machine which functioned correctly. So I've lost a little bit of time, walking a bit more than I anticipated today, and also having problems getting a bus ticket. Of course, there is an app, as my roommate Mr. Moad pointed out, but as I had to point out, I'm a dinosaur, and yes, my phone isn't functioning as a phone anymore. I think even if I put a SIM card in it from Poland, it would have issues because it's refusing to accept or make phone calls, as an example. Why it should do that, I have no idea whatsoever. Something I learned though towards the end of my stay in Ukraine. Nearly 80 years after the camp's liquidation, studies pertaining to its topography have yet to be conclusively completed. Archival sources often contain information that is imprecise, and field verification of research results is not always possible, as a considerable part of the former camp has since been taken over by the expanding city. However, plans and maps included in the museum collections, both those drawn up by the Germans during the construction of KL Lublin and those related to the post-war activity of the museum, allow us to illustrate the topographical transformations of Majdanek from the camp's establishment through its liquidation and until the present day. This allows us to understand why a part of the historical building substance was destroyed and which elements of the same have been preserved as part of spatial arrangements of the site of remembrance. have a walk around and then see how I am for time. I know it might be a case that in an ideal world you would start with the visitor centre, and that might be the sensible thing to do. However, I am aware of a sense of the time that I've lost today, and I really don't want to rush any more than I have to. Of course, the video will be edited down, so you won't see anything like as much of the footage I will be originally shooting, and it won't cover the whole amount of time that I spend walking around the camp. Otherwise, the video would be 2, 3, 4 hours long potentially. But let's just hope I'm not hanging around too long when they're trying to close the site down for the day, because I don't want to be a nuisance. But yes, all of which makes me think I need to get going finally, now that I've got here, and take a good look around the site again.